the day I released my
Oh
big
yeah.
5-hour MCU timeline video, where I retold the entire MCU in chronological order. The day I released that video, Marvel announced that they're releasing an official timeline book. They said it was coming this September. It looks like they've pushed that back to October now. The reason that's interesting news is because the timeline of the MCU is very convoluted and very complicated, and it moves around. If you watch Iron Man 1, every TV in the background says 2008 on it. By all accounts, that movie takes place in 2008. But then Iron Man 2 takes place 6 months later, but we know Iron Man 2 takes place in 2010. So retroactively, you have to say, okay, I guess Iron Man took place in 2009, right? So that's how it's gotten to be this complicated. You have nearly 30 movies, you have the Disney Plus shows, you have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Daredevil, etc. Can you fit it all together into a timeline? If you go to the MCU fandom, kind of like a wiki for the MCU, there are people who get really into the details to try and create a timeline down to the day. They'll say, this scene takes place on March 12th, 2009, and here's my evidence to back that up. They'll do things like look at the phase of the moon in the background of a shot. And some people have asked me about that. They were like, well, why did you place Moon Knight at this point in the timeline? The phase of the moon clearly indicates it would be at this point. And you would say, well, like the creators of the show are not paying attention to
Yeah.
that. But they are. For Moon Knight specifically, they were paying attention to the phase of the moon.
Mm.
But then the director of the show says, like, look, we were paying attention to it. We had a specific idea of where it falls in the timeline, but the producers don't necessarily agree, and it's kind of up to Marvel. So it's sort of like the details are there, but there's no guarantee that those details will stand the test of time according to Marvel.
Sorry, so they had to specifically film when the phase of the moon was in particular phase, or they would just like use CGI to like moon it up?
I don't know. My assumption is they'd probably use CGI. I imagine that's a pretty easy one to fake. You have the moon in the background, like I could do that, just eraser tool, you know?
That's pretty interesting. Can I ask the question that I'm sure everybody is wondering? Will they explain the Sony timeline? And where does Kraven the Hunter fit in?
I know that's the question on everybody's minds. Well, I mean, probably not. I mean, I think if you have any questions about Sony, like which Spider-Man is in the Sony Spider-Man universe, I think the answer is they don't know. They're trying to figure out all that stuff out. So
I actually do know, but I'm not telling you.
Okay, that's great, Daniel. Get out of here. Remember that stuff about Salt and Terrifier 2? That's you, next week. So the book's coming out. Marvel's finally going to put a stake in the ground. The last time they did an official timeline was when the Avengers came out. But obviously there have been a lot of movies since then. So they're coming out with this book that's going to put all the movies and everything onto an official timeline. But what's exciting, Daniel, I see the glazed look in your eyes. Just the other day, they released some sample pages. So we can finally get a look at this book.
Yeah.
Here are the kinds of questions people like me have. How specific is it going to be? Are we going to have like particular dates when things happened? It looks like the answer is no. It says things like early 2008 or spring 2008. And it's a very graphic book. Like you shouldn't let your kids read this. No, it'll be like a little snippet from Iron Man, a description of the events that transpired, and then a picture. Then like a big arrow that goes here, and then another picture. So it's like a very visual timeline of events. The other interesting thing is in the like 8 or 9 sample pages released, the only things mentioned were movies or Disney Plus shows. There's a splash page where it's a kind of brief overview of the Hulk's timeline, and you can see it mentions She-Hulk. And that was actually one of the big things that came out of this book. Over what period of time does She-Hulk take place? My timeline places it all in 2025, but apparently it takes place over the course of 2024 through 2025.
Boy, do you have egg on your face.
Oh my God, I know. But no mention of Daredevil, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., etc. Now, it's possible those will be on the pages in between, right? These were only some sample pages. But my bet is that they're only going to have the MCU movies and the Disney Plus shows, which take that egg off my face because that's what I did for the MCU timeline. And people were like, where's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? This is not the complete timeline. My response to that is always, if I did a complete timeline of world history, I would mention that the FBI exists. And I would mention big watershed cases, like the time they teamed up with the Avengers. But I wouldn't go through every single case the FBI took on. That's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I mention S.H.I.E.L.D. when they team up with the Avengers, but I'm not going to go to their day-to-day. They stopped this criminal.
Yeah.
They stopped that criminal. A summary of world events has to go to the big events that push forward the history of the universe. In this case, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it seems like Marvel's agrees with me. That's the big takeaway. I actually asked, there's a Marvel leaker, this guy on Twitter, or gal, I don't know, My Time to Shine, hello. They leak a bunch of Marvel stuff, some of which has proven to be true. And they held a Q&A, and I asked, hey, this Marvel Timeline book, is it going to include Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? And they responded, it's not going to be anything special. It's not really an answer to my question.
It's kind of like how Amy Pascal.
It's all happening. So that's the update on the MCU timeline. I'm looking forward to that book. I will be updating the MCU timeline video based on that book. My goal is to do 2 updates a year. So one update will be coming June 20th, I think. Kick off the summer, right before Secret Invasion, if anybody needs a refresher on everything. And then I'll update again around Christmas. My Christmas present to everybody. And by that point, this book will be out. So I'll incorporate that, move things around in the timeline based on how this book corrects things.
And for anybody who likes and leaves a comment on the new timeline video, you'll be putting them in a raffle, right? For a signed copy of the timeline book.
Signed by Kevin Feige. Well,
No, signed by
I
you.
will sign Kevin Feige's name.
Wait, so how are they going to handle like time travel in the timeline?
I don't know. The way I handled
The
it.
Slinky theory.
That's right. The way I handled it is I changed the font throughout the entire video in the corner, it says what year it is. When it was time travel, the font would turn to italics. It would turn blue. And in parentheses, it would say time travel.
Wait, so when you covered like events in 2008, right? And then you go into the future.
Yeah.
But then in the future, somebody travels back to 2008. Did you jump back to 2008 later in the video, or you show both 2008 things at once?
So it depends. In the case of the Avengers, when they time traveled, it was to an alternate timeline. So in the timeline I'm covering, the primary Marvel universe, you wouldn't have seen them come back in time. So for them, I just follow them to the alternate timeline. And I think I wrote in parentheses alternate timeline. But can I spoil Miss Marvel?
Go for it.
Spoilers for Miss Marvel. In that show, she went back in time in the actual timeline and affected her own history. So in that case, I mention her in the past, and then when I get to the future, I follow her back to the past and retell those events from her perspective.
That makes sense.
That was the fun of making that video.
Yeah.
I had thought about doing an MCU full recap, but I didn't get excited about it until I decided to do it in chronological order, because then it turned into this big puzzle to be solved, which was cool decisions to make, like that one. Do you cover when someone time travels? Do you talk about that point in time twice? It's fun.